Greetings, class. My name's Garrett Hall. Today I want to talk to you about Western civilization, why it's still relevant today, and why we should study it. So according to the sources that we read, Western civilization is difficult to define. Some would argue that it has its roots all the way back to ancient Greece. Others would say, well, it's really more of a 19th century, early 20th century concept. But regardless, the West is important. According to Bradley Berger's article, What Exactly is the West? It's not so much about geography as it is about philosophy, including the love of wisdom and the search for universal principles. And among those principles is the Western idea of dignity of the human person, regardless of their station in birth. A lot of the ideas that we embrace as far as equality and liberty and freedom and individual liberties and natural rights, these things come out of the West. The critics of the idea of Western civilization, they're quick to mention some of the negative things like slavery or sexism, racism, imperialism, and they use these things to say that these ideas that the West claim to have created, aren't real, or these ideas aren't they're not universal principles. But as Robert Royal mentions in Who Put the West in Western Civilization, these are negatives of world history, not just Western history. Sexism, racism, slavery, imperialism, these things are all the way back to antiquity, all around the world. You go any place, any time in the history of the world, you're going to see things like that are negative. But critics like to choose the West in the modern time to try to use these things to criticize the idea of Western civilization and instead embrace multiculturalism and things like that. But what's important to realize, and Royal mentions this, is the West is responsible for trying to get rid of those things. Equality and liberty, those are inventions of the West. And so the critics of the West try to use the negative things of Western history against it, but it's really Western ideology that leads to that thinking of trying to get rid of those things. And so this requires study. This is why we need to study the West. Juvenal, and I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, I do not speak French, but Juvenal in On Power, the Natural History of Its Growth, argues that liberty only belongs to those who can defend it. And he says that when people know and recognize their liberties, they will defend it and therefore be cautious of power. But when people do not recognize their liberties and instead only acknowledge that they have some type of right to vote, then they will be more willing to put power into place. They will accept power, just because they're offended by perceived inequalities. So it's very important that we understand our liberties and embrace them, so we know how to defend them, and we're willing to defend them. Even Kwame Appiah, who argued that there was no such thing as Western civilization, admitted that values are not a birthright. They must be protected. It's not enough to be citizens of the West, but we must learn about the West so that we can defend it. Western civilization must teach students of the West the value of their liberties so they will defend them. Thank you.